that we should have more Republicans on the show, but they don't want to come on. They're scared of us.
The idea that Republicans and conservatives simply will not come on The View because they are scared of the intellectual prowess of Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg and Sunny Hostin is one of the most laughable things I've heard in a long time. We got to check in with the lovely ladies over at The View on ABC News, which I didn't realize is like, I think their top rated show. We're going to get into this, but we've talked about The View a lot over the years because I think it is one of the mainstream media institutions that best displays the groupthink, the rewarding of mediocrity, and the bias and just the degradation of our political discourse. Like, you see far-right commentators who I think degrade our political discourse, mostly in the new media space, but also in the Fox News space a little bit. But then in the mainstream media space, it's like The View is probably the worst example of just the lowest IQ, most bad faith, wine mom commentary, and just the most egregious lack of intellectual diversity or honest discussion or dialogue or debates. And that's not just a hunch. That's an analytical conclusion that was just reached by the Media Research Center, which is a conservative media watchdog. They ran the numbers on The View's guests for 2025. And if you had asked me to guess, I would have told you that, like, okay, they have mostly liberal guests and only an occasional conservative or right-leaning guest. But I actually wouldn't have ever guessed that it was this extreme. But let's look at these numbers. Again, from the MRC. 2025, The View chatted politics with 128 liberal guests and 2 conservatives. That is insane. 128 to 2. Also, as you'll see, one of those 2 wasn't even a conservative, but they counted her anyway in the spirit of generosity. We'll get into all of that. But it's like, you really can't imagine a more skewed guest lineup than that, can you? And how is that even interesting to people? When I think about what shows and what programs I find interesting, it is almost exclusively shows like The Five on Fox News, where they have legit debates between actual smart Democrats like Jessica Tarlov and then smart conservative-leaning journalists like Dana Perino. And then on CNN, for example, I find the most interesting show, the CNN Newsnight, where they have Scott Jennings and often other right-leaning guests battling it out with prominent left-wing voices and with a center-left leaning host. I find those to be the more interesting shows, and it's not a coincidence that those are 2 of the highest rated shows on each of those networks, respectively. Then you have The View, which somehow all these wine moms still tune into by the millions, literally just no, or almost no, intellectual diversity. Just echo chambers and one-sided agreement and low IQ slop. And yet it's a massive multi-million-dollar operation that's so popular and successful. It's really sad. Anyway, more details from MRC here. December 19th was The View's last news show of the year, so it was the perfect time to examine how the ABC News program, the #1 rated daytime talk show, wow, that's bleak, was presenting political discussions to their audience in 2025. Over the course of the year, the latter half of season 28 and the first half of season 29, the predominantly Democratic and anti-Trump cast spoke politics with 128 guests and only 2 conservatives. Of the 128 left-leaning guests, 25 of them were Democratic politicians, and this includes former VP Kamala Harris, Senator Bernie Sanders, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Jasmine Crockett, the Congresswoman, and more. 5 more were former staffers of Democratic presidential administrations, like the Obama-era hosts of Pod Save America, and 2 appearances for Karine Jean-Pierre, President Biden's press secretary. They also had Sarah Kate Ellis of the left-leaning GLAAD, who's like one of the kookiest left-wing LGBT activist organizations, and they also had U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who was hawking a book. So, I actually, to be clear, see absolutely nothing wrong with this list. Every person I just read off, pretty much, is a person of influence and import on the Democratic side of the spectrum or the progressive side of the spectrum. And a news show should speak with them and engage. Now, I think The View should have been tougher on them and asked them more tough questions and held them more to account, but there's nothing wrong with having these people on. It's the lack of balance that is the problem, as you will see. So, more here. As for their conservative/right-leaning guests, both had major asterisks by their names. The first one wasn't invited on until over a month into season 29, actress Cheryl Hines. Despite being there to hawk her own book, Hines was married to HHS Secretary RFK Jr., and having her on was a way for them to beat up on him via proxy. While having left-wing politics herself, she was forced to defend her husband's, and by extension, the Trump administration's policies. Thus, she was counted as right-leaning. So this is so fascinating. She's not a conservative, I don't believe, politically, or right-wing, or even a Republican, but her husband is RFK Jr., and she defended him. So, to be ultra generous, they counted her as a conservative for purposes of this analysis. They also didn't count as liberal guests people like Robert De Niro, who are left-wing, but in their appearance on The View didn't talk about politics. So this analysis was, if anything, generous to The View in terms of counting its intellectual diversity as slightly higher than maybe it would otherwise be, depending on how you do the methodology. And yet still, this abysmal level of actual viewpoint diversity or intellectual a spectrum of any kind. The second conservative, and this is more from MRC here, was Georgia Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was the first GOP politician who was currently in office. The View had hosted since New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu was on in August of 2024. As Newsbusters reported at the time, they only had Greene on because she was being a headache for congressional leadership during the government shutdown. The cast also tried to recruit her into becoming a Democrat. And yeah, I think it's good that they had on MTG, but it's not a coincidence that they only had her on as soon as she started beefing with Trump and criticizing Trump, right? It would have meant more in terms of intellectual honesty, diversity of opinion, and thought to have had her on a year or two before, or even now, to discuss the things where she was pushing right-wing causes. If you were actually interested in the fundamental mission that these shows are supposed to be about, but the hosts and the EP aren't. And then they have the audacity to suggest that the reason people won't come on is because they're scared of them or something. I got to play you guys. These are a couple older clips that are relevant to this new analysis. This first clip from The View. Take a listen.
But that's the great thing about The View. We want people to come and give their views. And everyone who comes here, we try to be respectful and we ask tough questions. We ask tough questions because we're otherwise speculating.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we can ask. Go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say that I think that we should have more Republicans on the show, but they don't want to come on. They're scared of us.
But
It's like Marjorie Taylor Greene says that she finds the Republican men afraid of powerful women. Well, that may be true of all the political persuasions. But
oh my gosh. I can't believe that they say. I've seen this clip before. I saw it at the time. I think I covered it on the show when it happened. But the idea that Republicans and conservatives simply will not come on The View because they are scared of the intellectual prowess of Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg and Sonny Austin is one of the most laughable things I've heard in a long time. And of course, it was instantly debunked by itself because immediately all over social media and in actual formal outreach to the show and their producers through bookers and PR, tons of huge name conservative guests volunteered to go on the show. And so it's just the fact that they made this statement and then didn't have any of them on shows that it wasn't honest. They don't really want to have more Republicans on, and they've just tried so hard and they won't say yes. No, they don't. They're not actually interested in doing it, and they use that as a scapegoat or an excuse for why they don't actually bring diverse viewpoints to their audience. And then they had the audacity to suggest that all these major media personalities who reached out to them afterwards, which included some very big names, just weren't the caliber of guest of The View. Listen to this. This is from the podcast they do behind the scenes. This is the executive producer speaking with a couple of the hosts, including the one you'll hear say this is Sarah Hines. Listen to this.
Especially
But
on this
the way
show.
you understand or try to understand how they can do those things and how they can exist in those dichotomies is to have somebody come on the show and have a real conversation.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think that was good. And hopefully we'll have more of them. And
I hope so. I mean,
yeah.
if Marjorie Taylor Greene can sit with all of us,
Right.
anyone can.
And it's not like, listen, and people, people like to say, we don't have other people on. When you go through the names we've had on.
Oh, wait, but Brian,
Yeah.
first, one of the things after we talked about having other voices on, what
Yes.
made me laugh is there were people that you mentioned and then I'd mention to you a who, and you're like, that's the point. The View
yeah.
still has a certain caliber of guests. Just because you're conservative and you have some podcast and people listen to you does not mean you're,
No, of course,
you're
we
going
have
to be invited to sit at the table.
people that
So, guys, the reason they didn't take up any of the huge name conservatives who reached out to them and offered to go on the show is because they don't reach the caliber of guest that they have on The View. Of course, that doesn't go in the opposite direction, right? Because they had all sorts of left-wing podcasters on, including Jennifer Welch, including the Pod Save America bros. And I think they should, because those are prominent liberal and progressive people with big platforms and big audiences. They should have them on and talk to them. But you can't do that, but then say that like Ben Shapiro and these other people, Megyn Kelly and these other people aren't big enough. They're just random podcasters. See how disingenuous this is? The truth is, I think they know that if they have actual smart conservative women even, or males, because they do have male guests, but they do obviously focus on women. It's a women-focused show. They'd eviscerate them. Like I have some criticisms of Megyn Kelly at this point. I don't agree with her on a whole host of issues, but she would eat them up for lunch if she went on that show. And I'm sure she would accept an invitation. I really am. So it's just dishonest. It's just, I think, cowardly. And it's so emblematic of everything that's wrong with mainstream media and the bias and how they lost the trust of the American people. And I find it so incredibly frustrating because the new media is now falling apart and is all the rise of these new influencers who are huge. They're constant, whether it's left-wing TikTokers or right-wing YouTube sensations like Candace Owens, they're spreading insane conspiracies, wild misinformation. They're rallying everybody up, getting each other at our throats, dividing people and engaging in extreme partisanship and rhetoric and just ratcheting things up. So it's not like the new media is doing a good job right now. I certainly don't think that's the case. But it's not hard to see why people migrated away from traditional media when like the top rated daytime show in news is The View. And they literally had two right-leaning guests in all of 2025 compared to hundreds of liberal-leaning guests. It's just shameless and diabolical. And I don't know, guys, I find it very demoralizing as somebody who, I'm doing great. I'm building a nice life and career for myself in this new YouTube space. But if I ever had one of these mainstream media platforms, a daytime show or anything like that, I would be doing it in such a more, and not to toot my own horn, interesting way. Actually having debates and dialogues and people across the spectrum and arguments and focusing on hammering out the differences and divides that divide our public. And instead, it's frustrating to see these people not just get paid millions of dollars while being incredibly mediocre at their jobs. That's frustrating, sure, but I don't really care about the money. It's more frustrating to watch them waste the opportunity they have to actually do something constructive with the massive platform and gift that they've been given by having it. What do you guys think, though? Let me know in the comments. Make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, yada, yada, yeah. And that'll be it for today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure to rate and review the show if you're listening on audio podcasts, and we'll be back with more real soon.